It started as an ordinary evening, a quiet Texas town settling in for the night. No one could have imagined what was about to unfold. A respected lawman, a shocking act, a household turned into a scene of confusion and disbelief. What could push someone sworn to uphold the law, to take matters into their own hands? Tonight we break down the events that left an entire town searching for answers. A trusted figure, a fractured bond, and a moment that changed everything. Was this a choice made in desperation, or was it something else entirely? Before we begin, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications for more real-life crime stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the quiet Texas town. Sheriff Daniel Brooks rubbed his temples as he leaned back in his office chair, the weight of the day pressing down on him. He had spent the last 12 hours handling a complicated case, one that left him questioning the very laws he swore to uphold. Being a sheriff was more than just a job. It was a way of life. For 15 years, he had worn the badge with pride, protecting the town and ensuring justice was served. People respected him, trusted him. But at the end of the day, behind the uniform, he was just a father trying to do his best for his daughter. Emily, his 14-year-old girl, was his world. She had been born with challenges that made life difficult, but her spirit remained unbroken. Ever since his wife's accident, he had been both father and mother to her, ensuring she had everything she needed. She stayed at his mother's house after school since his shifts often ran late. It was a routine they had followed for years, and he never had a reason to question it. Tonight, however, something felt different. As he gathered his things, a nagging feeling settled in his chest, though he couldn't quite place it. Maybe it was just exhaustion. He sighed, grabbed his keys, and stepped out into the cool night air, unaware that this would be the last peaceful moment he'd have for a long time. Roger Barnes had been a part of the family for 5 years, but to Daniel, he always felt like an outsider. There was something about him, something hard to explain. His mother, Carol, had met Roger at a community event, and before long, they were married. She believed in second chances, and Roger was a man with a past. Petty crimes, a few run-ins with the law, nothing too serious. At least that's what he had told them. He promised he had changed, and for a while it seemed true. He found steady work, attended church, and took on the role of stepfather. Still, Daniel never let his guard down. Roger spent a lot of time with Emily, offering to help around the house, picking her up from school when Carol was busy. It had seemed like kindness, but looking back, Daniel would question every single moment. That night, Roger was the only one home with Emily. Carol had left town to visit her sister, and Daniel, caught up in work, hadn't given it much thought. After all, it was just another night, or so he believed. Daniel drove through town, the streets mostly empty. He passed familiar houses, dimly lit storefronts, and the old diner where he and Emily would sometimes have breakfast on his days off. The uneasiness in his chest grew stronger. There was no reason for concern, yet something gnawed at him. He tried to shake it off, blaming stress. Maybe it was the case he had worked on earlier, a dispute that had escalated too far. Maybe it was the exhaustion from months of working without a real break. Or maybe deep down he knew. As he turned onto the street where his mother's house sat, he noticed something odd. The porch light, which Carol always left on, was off. The curtains in the front window were drawn shut. It wasn't alarming, but it was unusual. Daniel parked the car and sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. He took a deep breath, then stepped out. What he was about to see would change everything. The house was silent, the kind of silence that felt unnatural. Sheriff Daniel Brooks stepped inside, his boots pressing against the wooden floor, each step echoing through the empty hallway. He had stopped by his mother's house as he always did, expecting to find Emily in the living room, maybe watching her favorite show or doing homework. But something felt off. A faint noise drifted from down the hall. Muffled sounds. He called out his daughter's name, but there was no response. The uneasy feeling in his chest tightened as he moved toward the bedroom. The door was slightly open, just enough to see inside, and then his entire world shattered in an instant. There stood Roger, his posture rigid, his movements halted as he turned in shock. Emily was frozen in place, Her wide, tear-filled eyes locked on her father. She looked helpless, trapped in a moment she couldn't escape from. Time slowed. A fire erupted in Daniel's chest, consuming every rational thought. A lifetime of discipline, of law enforcement training, of knowing how to control his emotions, none of it mattered anymore. At that moment, he was not a sheriff. He was not an officer of the law. He was just a father. A father whose instincts took over before reason could catch up. The next few seconds unfolded in a blur. Roger's expression shifted from shock to panic as he realized what was happening. His hands raised slightly, his mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came. Daniel's grip tightened. His hand moved instinctively, reaching for the weapon that had always been at his side. His vision blurred with rage, his heart pounded against his ribs, and before he could even process the decision, his gun was drawn. Then, the deafening sound. One shot, then another, and another. The echoes filled the house, bouncing off the walls, drowning out every other sound. 10 rounds fired in rapid succession. The force of each impact sent Roger staggering backward until his body finally gave way. He collapsed onto the floor, motionless. Daniel stood still, his breath shallow and uneven. His hands trembled. The weight of the moment pressed down on him, but his mind refused to register anything beyond the burning sensation in his chest. And then, another sound. Soft, shaky breaths. A whimper. Emily. His head snapped toward her. She hadn't moved. Her small frame shook, her hands gripping the blanket beneath her. She wasn't crying out loud, but the tears were there, silently rolling down her cheeks. Everything else disappeared. The anger, the shock, the noise, it all faded into the background. Only she mattered now. The room was eerily quiet, the lingering scent of gunpowder mixed with the stillness of the air. Roger's body lay on the floor, the reality of what had just occurred settling over the space like a heavy fog. Daniel's breath remained unsteady as he stumbled forward, his gun slipping from his grasp. He dropped to his knees beside Emily, his hands hovering over her as if afraid to touch her, afraid to break the fragile moment between them. She was unharmed, but deeply shaken. He reached for her, gently pulling her into his arms, holding her tightly as though trying to shield her from what had already happened. His mind raced. What now? The law had always been clear to him, but now the lines were blurred. His duty, his training, the rules he had lived by, they all clashed with what had just taken place. Then the crushing reality set in. He needed to call it in. Reaching for his phone, his fingers hesitated over the numbers. How did he even begin to explain this? What words could possibly describe what had just unfolded? The call was made. The words were spoken. And soon the distant sound of sirens filled the night air. Blue and red lights flashed against the walls as law enforcement arrived. Officers rushed in, their voices urgent, their weapons drawn, until they saw him, their colleague, their friend. Daniel didn't resist. His hands were raised before they even asked. He barely registered the cold steel of the cuffs as they locked around his wrists. His eyes never left Emily, who was being carefully led away, wrapped in a protective embrace by a responding officer. The world around him moved in slow motion. He had spent years serving the law, dedicating his life to enforcing it. But now, he was on the other side of it. The courtroom was tense, the air thick with anticipation. Every seat was taken, with reporters, spectators, and legal experts analyzing every move. Daniel sat motionless, his hands clasped together, his expression unreadable. The weight of his decision now rested in the hands of strangers. The prosecution was relentless. They portrayed him as a man who had overstepped the boundaries of the law, allowing his emotions to dictate his actions. They argued that his extensive training as a sheriff should have guided him to handle the situation differently. 10 rounds fired. That was their focus. It was not an act of protection, they claimed, but an explosion of rage. The defense took an entirely different approach. They painted the picture of a father driven to the edge by an unspeakable discovery. In that instant, Daniel was no longer a sheriff. He was a man reacting to the sight of his defenseless daughter in distress. The legal team pushed for temporary insanity, insisting that no parent in his position would have acted rationally. Emily was the heart of the case, yet she remained fragile. The courtroom environment overwhelmed her, and each attempt to have her recall that night left her visibly shaken. The defense ultimately chose to spare her from testifying, knowing the trauma was too great. Despite the legal strategies unfolding, there was no certainty in the outcome. This was not a case of clear-cut justice. It was a battle of perspectives. The jury would decide whether Daniel was a father who lost control in a moment of horror or a lawman who took justice into his own hands. The trial became a national spectacle. News headlines rotated constantly, each one offering a different angle. Across social media, people fiercely debated the case. For some, Daniel was a symbol of parental instinct, a father who did what the law could not. Supporters argued that his actions were justified, that a parent's duty was to protect their child at all costs. Petitions surfaced demanding his release, and outside the courthouse, banners reading, "Daniel Brooks is a hero," were waved by passionate supporters. But not everyone saw it that way. Critics condemned his actions, insisting that even in the face of anger, a sheriff should never cross the line. Some believed the justice system had rules for a reason, and Daniel had violated them in a way that could not be excused. The case took an even more dramatic turn when leaked footage from Daniel's body camera surfaced. The grainy, unstable video captured his unsteady breathing, his hands still gripping his weapon, and a single haunting statement, his shaken voice muttering words that only added fuel to the debate. The courtroom was not the only place where judgment was being passed. The court of public opinion had already rendered its own divided verdict, leaving Daniel caught between being seen as a protector or a reckless executioner. While the world debated Daniel's fate, Carol Brooks, his mother, finally spoke out. Her voice had been absent throughout the trial, but when she finally stepped forward, her words carried a weight that could not be ignored. She revealed a painful truth, one that had been buried beneath doubt and denial. For years, she had harbored uneasy suspicions about Roger. There were moments that felt wrong, glimpses of behavior that unsettled her. But without evidence, she had convinced herself that it was nothing more than paranoia. She had wanted to believe that Roger had changed, that his troubled past was behind him. But deep inside, she had always feared the worst. Her admission reshaped the entire conversation. Supporters of Daniel felt justified, claiming that he had acted in a way the system had failed to. Opponents were left questioning whether justice had already been served that night. The trial was still ongoing, the jury still deliberating. But in the eyes of many, Daniel's actions were no longer just about the law. They were about a truth that should have been uncovered long before that night. And now, with everything exposed, the only question left was whether the legal system would agree. The courtroom was packed. The air inside felt heavy, as if weighed down by the unspoken thoughts of everyone present. Daniel Brooks sat at the defendant's table, his hands folded, his expression unreadable. His entire life had been spent fighting for justice, but now he was the one being judged. The prosecution painted him as reckless, someone who had let anger dictate his actions. The defense argued that he was a father, not a sheriff in that moment, a man acting on instinct to protect his daughter. Then, something unexpected. A file was slid across the table to the defense attorney. An investigator had dug deeper into Roger Barnes, uncovering something no one had seen coming. Roger Barnes wasn't who they thought he was. Buried beneath layers of falsified documents was a different name, one belonging to a man with a dark past. Under a previous identity, Roger had been arrested years ago for crimes involving children. He had served time, changed his name, and moved to Texas for a fresh start. No one had suspected a thing. Gasps rippled through the courtroom as the evidence was presented. The jury members exchanged glances. The judge leaned forward, studying the documents carefully. Daniel's mind reeled. He had never known any of this. All he had seen that night was a moment of horror, one that pushed him past the edge. But now an unsettling thought crept in. If he hadn't pulled the trigger, would Roger have gotten away with it again? The revelation changed everything, and yet it changed nothing at all. The facts were simple. Daniel had acted without thinking. He had drawn his gun and fired. But now, with Roger's hidden past exposed, the situation became more complicated. If Daniel had called for backup instead, Roger would have been taken into custody. But the legal system wasn't always perfect. Could Roger have manipulated the system again? Could he have walked free, slipping through the cracks as he had before? The weight of the question pressed down on Daniel. He had spent years believing in law and order, trusting that justice would always be served. But on that night, he had acted outside of the law. Had he done the right thing? Some saw him as a hero, a father who did what was necessary to protect his child. Others believed he had let rage cloud his judgment. The debate stretched far beyond the courtroom, spreading through the media and across social platforms. Would justice have been better served if Roger had lived? Or had Daniel ensured true justice in his own way? These were questions that had no easy answers. And as the trial neared its final verdict, the only thing certain was that no matter the outcome, the events of that night would haunt Daniel forever. The courtroom fell silent as the jury returned. Each face was unreadable, their expressions a reflection of the long hours spent deliberating. Daniel Brooks sat motionless, his hands gripping the edges of the table. The weight of the past weeks hung over him like a storm cloud. The judge asked the jury for their decision. The foreman stood, his voice steady. The words that followed would decide Daniel's fate. The verdict was read. A wave of emotion swept through the courtroom. Gasps, whispers, reactions from both sides. Some were relieved, others outraged. Daniel himself sat still, staring ahead, processing the outcome. Outside, the media swarmed, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions. The town was divided. Some called him a man who had taken justice into his own hands. Others believed he had acted as any father would, that he had done what the law might have failed to do. Emily, now under therapy, struggled with the weight of everything. She had been saved, but at what cost? Her father's future, her own peace of mind. Nothing would ever be the same. Carol, Daniel's mother, carried the burden of guilt. She had let Roger into their lives, never fully knowing who he was. She wondered if she could have stopped this before it ever happened. And Daniel? He would carry that night with him forever. Whether he was free or behind bars, the moment he pulled the trigger would never leave him. Justice isn't always clear. Sometimes the right thing and the wrong thing feel the same. One decision, one moment can change everything. In moments of rage, justice, and vengeance blur. What would you have done? Let us know in the comments, was Sheriff Daniel a hero, or did he cross the line? Your opinion matters, and if you enjoy gripping crime stories that make you think, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. More shocking cases are coming soon.